The Varath left a crater when they abandoned this world. Not a metaphor. An actual crater, 11 kilometers wide, 4 deep, blasted into the chalk shelf of the continent's western coast when their colony ship failed on departure 46,000 years ago. The hull stress fractures ran for kilometers in every direction. The detonation fused the surrounding bedrock into glass at temperatures that took our early geologists centuries to explain. We found the evidence in the strata long before we had any name for what had made it. The alloy traces that matched nothing in Earth's mineral record, the isotopic signature in the impact glass, the subsurface magnetic anomalies that our earliest scientists mapped and cataloged, and eventually, after some thousands of years of scholarship and the slow development of interstellar communication technology, understood. An accident. The Varath Ascending, largest vessel of the colonial administration fleet, had suffered catastrophic drive failure during departure burn. The explosion had been survivable for most of the colony staff, who were in transit capsules at the time, and they had been recovered by the remaining fleet vessels. The wreck was left. The planet was left. We were left. That was 46,000 years ago. I want to tell this right, because the Accord Historical Office has been requesting a formal account for 3 years now, and the 2 drafts I have given them keep coming back with requests for more detail, and I understand what they want. They want the kind of drama that official histories prefer. Tense moments, the weight of civilizational stakes, the feeling of a close thing that might have gone differently. What I can give them is the truth, which is quieter than drama, and I think more valuable for exactly that reason. The truth of this encounter is not the tension of it. There was no tension. The truth of this encounter is the preparation. My name is Karen Veth. I am 57 years old. I was born in the Caliph Founding Quarter, the oldest district of the Caliph megacity, on the western coast of the continent. I grew up in what older residents still call the Varath Shelf District, the low bowl of the impact crater, where the first human settlers made their homes 44,000 years ago in the walls of the crash site, using the strange alloy of the wrecked colonial ship as their primary building material, because they had nothing else strong enough, and they were practical people. I attended school 3 blocks from the primary impact point. The transit line I rode to the academy ran through tunnels bored alongside the deepest sections of the original hull, and the support brackets in those tunnels had been fabricated 400 years before I was born, from smelted wreck material that was itself a secondary recasting of alloy recovered 2,000 years before that. The Varath Ascending was in everything. We had been living inside its bones for 44,000 years. I completed my mandatory service years in the Accord Warship Corps, came home, went back, built a career, and found myself 30 years later as captain of the heavy warship Accord's Unbroken Line, on station 14 kilometers above the Caliph Shelf. 7th year of my commission. 14th year above this coast. The view from the forward viewport had become, over those years, something like a face I knew, the sprawl of the megacity from the coastline inland, the towers catching the light differently in morning and in afternoon, the crater district visible from altitude as a low bowl in the city's heart, older and lower than the surrounding construction, carrying in its compressed geography 44,000 years of continuous habitation. My grandmother had been a structural engineer on the crater district expansion 40 years before I was born. She had worked on the deep tunnels that ran alongside the oldest surviving sections of the original hull. She was the one who first told me about the alloy, how the metallurgists of her era had tested it and found that the Varath had been working with fabrication processes that Earth's industry had taken another 2,000 years to replicate, and how strange it was to be building with a material your own civilization could not yet manufacture, using techniques reverse-engineered from the thing that had been abandoned here. She said it without bitterness. She was a practical woman, like the settlers who had come before her. You build with what you have. You remember what was left, and you make it into something that serves the living, and you keep making. I had been thinking about her for 11 days, when the Varath Recovery Wing crossed the outer marker at 0412 local time and began broadcasting on the commission frequency. The 11 days were the waiting period. The Accord Frontier Monitoring Division's buoy network, Calith Approach Sector, Outer Vector Array, covering the approach corridors that a Varath origin vessel would most likely use, had flagged 9 commercial-grade vessels on an inbound trajectory 17 days before first contact. The formation's drive signatures matched archived Varath commercial salvage specifications, decoded from the wreck site records 31,000 years ago and cross-referenced annually since then, against any new data that came through the Galactic communication network. Their approach vector was a straight line aimed at the Calith shelf. The analysis took 4 hours and produced a single confident answer. We had been ready for this for 31,000 years. We had been ready for this specific window, this 6-decade window of predicted commission vessel arrival, calculated from Varath bureaucratic periodization cycles, decoded from the wreck site administrative archives for 11 years. The Accord Calith response formation had been assembled and briefed across 3 years of preparation, 47 warships in position, the formation covering all viable approach vectors, the Accord orbital defense ring at full active status. My signals officer, Tareth Olin, had the full counter package staged and ready to fire in under 4 seconds. He had rehearsed the transmission sequence so many times, the motion had become involuntary. We had done the work, all of it, long before any of the 9 vessels had cleared the outer marker. All that remained was the formality of their arrival. When the monitoring division's alert came through, there was nothing to scramble. I walked to the bridge at 0355, 57 minutes before the outer marker crossing, because I wanted to be in my chair when it happened, and I did not want to be hurrying. I drank a cup of coffee. I reviewed the final page of the counterbrief for the last time, though I could have recited any section of it from memory by then. I looked at the Calith shelf below us in the pre-dawn dark, the city lights spread across the coastline, the crater district visible even at night as the low depression in the heart of the grid. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the people who had built the first shelters in the crater walls 44,000 years ago. I thought about what it meant to be the answer to an assessment that had given your civilization 4% odds of survival. At 0414, Tareth looked up from his console. "They're on the right frequency, Captain. Exactly the right frequency." "Of course they are," I said. There is something in that exchange I have been thinking about since. The commission frequency was a detail from the wreck site records, a salvage operations channel designation found in the administrative archives of the Varath Ascending, decoded and catalogued 31,000 years ago, and monitored passively on a continuous basis since then. Because when you know someone might come back someday, you listen on the channel they would use. The Varath Recovery Wing was broadcasting on that frequency because it was the correct channel for a commission of this type. They had done that much of their research. What they had not done was check whether anyone at the coordinates was still alive and listening. The wing was 9 vessels. I had the composite scan on my secondary display within minutes of the outer marker crossing. The lead hauler, the reclaimer of Dreveth Ascending, a vessel whose name was not accidental, and which told me the commission officers had researched the crash event, at least in its broad strokes. 4 mid-class recovery escorts, the kind of vessels a serious salvage operation carries for hull extraction and debris management. 3 support tenders. And at the rear of the formation, the Varath Mandate Registry, a single command frigate where the commission officers would be stationed. Commercial-grade armor, commercial recovery drive specifications. The weapons catalog came back on the second passive scan. Point defense arrays, 2 light deterrence cannons on the lead hauler. Nothing that would be relevant in an engagement with even a single warship of the Accord formation. They had not come for a fight. They had come to collect a wreck. One detail stood out in the drive signature analysis. The reclaimer was running on 3 of 4 drive nodes. The 4th node was operating but degraded the signature of a node pushed through a long transit without adequate maintenance intervals. or that had taken some minor impact damage en route. The reclaimer was not crippled. It was not in danger, but it was not capable of a rapid unassisted departure, and that single fact altered the geometry of the impoundment proceedings in ways that the brief's contingency section had anticipated. I noted it for my executive officer, Commander Varath, who had been standing watch since 0300. She pulled up the contingency documentation without speaking and read it through, which was Sale's way. She processed everything in silence and only spoke when she had something to add. After a few minutes she looked up and said, "Contingency 4. I said, "Yes." We left it there, because everything the contingency said was already in both our heads. I let them broadcast their commission for 4 minutes. Standard protocol give the incoming party time to complete their opening statement, transmit their credentials, establish the legal basis of their claim. The Mandate Registry's commission officers were thorough. They transmitted in Varath legal standard, which our translation archive had held for 31,000 years, and which the auto-translation layer rendered in under 2 seconds. They cited the original colonial claim, the crash event record, the salvage authority charter, the 46,000-year commission continuance under Varath preservation law. They cited the coordinates of the Varath Ascending's primary hull. They cited the material specifications of the alloy they expected to recover. They cited the 18-generation bureaucratic chain of authority under which they were operating, each renewal certified and entered in the Varath Commission Registry. By their own legal framework, they were entirely correct. They had a valid commission, properly filed and properly maintained across every renewal cycle. They had come to collect their property. When they finished, I nodded to Tereth. He fired the counter package. 4 seconds. The package contained 3 documents. The first was the Accord Salvage Counter Authority filing on Varath Reclamation Commission Dreveth, case number 1. The only case number, because we had been certain there would be only one attempt. 68 million pages in Varath legal standard, cross-indexed, certified, time-stamped at 31,247 years prior, and built entirely from Varath law, Varath records, and Varath charter framework. Every argument against our position was also an argument against their own legal tradition. The Accord archivists had found a particular satisfaction in that approach, and they had been right to take it. It was clean work, airtight work, the kind of construction that does not require force to back it up, because it does not leave room for a counter-argument to stand. The adverse possession case alone ran to 17 million pages. It documented our continuous habitation and development of the crash site from the earliest settlement record, Exhibit 1, 44,000 years ago. The first human construction in the crater walls through to the present, citing 714 Varath legal precedents, drawn entirely from Varath's own jurisprudence, covering every applicable provision of the 45,000-year statutory threshold. We exceeded that threshold by approximately 4,000 years. The margin was not an accident. The Accord archivists had understood, 31,000 years ago, that the legal argument had to be unambiguous, and they had built it to be exactly that. The second document was a geological survey of the crash site, current as of that morning. It showed the Caliph megacity in full detail, the full extent of the settlement, the infrastructure layers visible in the survey data, the construction history stratified across 400 generations, the alloy assay reports from 2,000 years of foundation work in the crater district, the current population density of the founding quarter, 4,312,000 permanent residents. The third document was a surface view feed, live, from a camera on the bow of Accord's unbroken line. It showed the Caliph shelf below us, the sprawl of the megacity extending from the coast inland for 200 kilometers, the towers, the transit infrastructure, the city lights still burning in the pre-dawn dark, the eastern horizon beginning to lighten. At the center of the frame, lower than the surrounding construction, and visible as a depression in the city grid, was the place where the Varath Ascending had come down 46,000 years ago. The crater walls were foundation. The alloy was structural pillar. The city had been growing from the impact site for 44,000 years, one generation at a time. And what the camera showed was the result of all of it, a living city of millions, built on the bones of the vessel the Varath Commission had crossed the galaxy to retrieve. I kept the feed open and waited. The mandate registry did not respond for 11 minutes. My executive officer came to stand beside me at the viewport at the 4-minute mark of the silence. She looked at the surface, feed on my secondary display, then at the Calith shelf through the forward glass, and she said nothing. I said nothing. The silence between us was not tense. It was the silence of people who have done their preparation correctly and are watching the preparation work. And there is a particular quality to that silence that I have not found a better word for than comfortable, which is perhaps too mild a word, but it is the accurate one. At 9 minutes, Sale said, quietly, "That's a long silence." "They're reading the survey," I said. "Or watching the feed." Possibly both. The dawn was coming at the eastern edge of the shelf, a thin brightening along the horizon, the city lights still fully burning below, the towers just beginning to catch the first color of morning. From 14 kilometers up, on a clear day, you could see the distinction between the founding quarter and the surrounding city. The older district sat lower, compressed by its own history, and its profile was different from the surrounding megacity. Shorter buildings, denser construction, the scale of something that had grown incrementally over a very long time, rather than being planned all at once. My grandmother's school was in that district. My father had walked those streets before her. The people who had carved the memorial inscription, 400 generations back, had walked those streets before him. 400 generations of ordinary people living their ordinary lives on top of something they did not fully understand, and building anyway, and leaving something behind for the next generation to build on. That was the history of the founding quarter. That was the history of the world. At 11 minutes and 43 seconds, the mandate registry opened the channel. The wing commander spoke first. His name resolved to Varath Recovery through the translation layer, a navigator caste designation, according to our archives on Varath social structure, which told me the mission had been assembled as a logistics and routing operation rather than a command authority proceeding. The commission officers aboard the registry held the legal authority. Varath Recovery held the vessels. That division of authority would matter before the day was finished. His voice through the translation layer was controlled in the way of someone who has not yet determined the dimensions of what they have encountered, and is being careful not to say anything that commits them to a position they cannot hold. "You have built on the site of the commission object," he said. "We have," I said. "The commission object is a registered Varath colonial asset under the Preservation and Recovery Charter of—" "We have the charter," I said. "We have read it many times. Our response filing cites it 73,000 times. I would recommend your commission officers begin reading the filing at Index Section 4, which addresses adverse possession under continuous habitation across the 45,000-year statutory threshold. Section 4 alone is 3,412,000 pages, and it is the foundation of our position. You will want to understand it before we proceed further." A pause. "You knew we were coming." "Yes." "How long have you known?" I looked at Tareth. He had the timestamp on his display already. 31,000 years, I said. Give or take. The silence that followed was longer than the first one. I want to be fair to the Varath, because fairness is what the account requires, and I believe they were owed it. They were not conquerors. They were not a military force. They were a salvage operation commercial, filing-driven, operating in good faith within a legal framework they had every reason to believe was still valid, and they had come a very long way to collect a piece of property their ancestors had left behind. Varath Recovery was not a reckless commander. He had done his preparation. He had reviewed the Commission's 46,000-year history, confirmed the hull coordinates in historical survey data, verified the alloy signature, secured his charter through proper channels. He had done everything a competent recovery commander does before a mission of this cost and duration. What he had not done, what no one in the Varath Reclamation Authority had apparently done, through any of the 18 commission renewals across 46,000 years, was check whether anyone was still living at the coordinates. I do not say this with contempt. I say it because it is the only explanation for the mission that makes sense. The Varath had assessed this world at 4% survival probability before departure. Their models had been honest, built from available data, not unreasonable given what they knew. They had made a calculation, classified the world as dormant, and departed. The commission had been renewed bureaucratically 18 times by administrators who reviewed the file and saw the dormancy classification and approved another renewal period without dispatching a review vessel, because a dormant world did not require review. It was an entirely rational administrative decision under their framework. The framework had not accounted for the possibility that 4% meant something. We had spent 31,000 years turning that 4% into a 68 million-page legal argument in their own language. That was the point. Varath asked for time to confer with the commission officers. I gave him 6 hours. My weapons officer, Lieutenant Kareth Devon, ran his standard watch checks with a professionalism that I noted and approved. He was 8 months out of the academy and on his first deep space assignment, and he was trying, with partial success, not to show how much he found this significant. The effort was admirable. I had been his age once, on a first serious assignment, and I remembered the weight of knowing you were part of something that would be in the record long after you were gone. It is a clarifying feeling when the preparation is solid. It keeps your attention where it should be. Tareth monitored the wing's internal communications, flagging anything that needed translation. Most of it was the commission officers beginning to read the filing index. Fragments came through numbers, citation counts, the dimensions of the adverse possession case assembling themselves in someone else's understanding for the first time. I listened to the translation fragments and thought about the archivists who had built the filing over 31,000 years, generation after generation of legal scholars who would never know whether their work would be needed, who had built it anyway because the obligation was clear and because that was what it meant to remember. The Accord Salvage Counter Authority had been formally constituted 412 years after we decoded the commission frequency. The founding charter was simple: maintain, certify, and expand the legal counterfiling indefinitely, under the assumption that the commission would eventually dispatch a recovery vessel, and that vessel would need to be met with a filing that left no argument unaddressed. The founding archivists had understood that indefinitely meant what it said. They had structured the institution to outlast any individual human lifetime, any political administration, any shift in the broader Accord framework. The filing had survived 3 governmental restructurings, 1 century-long period of reduced funding during a resource contraction, and 2 complete overhauls of the Accord legal infrastructure that had required the entire filing to be re-indexed in new frameworks without losing continuity with the old ones. Every generation of archivists had added to it, certified what the previous generation had built, and passed the institution forward. Some of them had spent entire careers on a single section of the adverse possession argument. Some had contributed only a few years before retirement or death, adding their certified submissions to a structure they knew would be carried forward by others they would not live to meet. That was the 31,000 years, not a single sustained act of preparation. 31,000 years of individual acts of preparation, stacked one on top of another by people who understood that the obligation did not end with them, that the next generation would need to pick it up and carry it forward, and who built the institution so that carrying it forward was possible. The filing was not a monument. It was the ongoing work of people who took seriously the idea that what they built would matter after they were gone. Lieutenant Devon was at his console running the watch checks when I came back from my thoughts. He had the careful look of someone who wants to ask a question and is deciding whether it is appropriate. I had learned to recognize that look in junior officers. After a moment I said, "Ask it." He said, "Captain, When was the last time someone read the entire filing? All 68 million pages? I don't know, I said. I would assume never, in one continuous reading. The archivists maintain it in index sections. Different sections have different revision histories. Some sections have been read thoroughly for certification purposes. Others exist as complete records that have never been read in full by any individual. That is not unusual for an archive of this scope. He was quiet for a moment, processing this. So it's possible that parts of it have never been read by anyone alive. Parts of it were written by people who have been dead for 20,000 years. Yes, that is possible. He looked at his console, then back at me. And it still counts. Legally. The certification chain is unbroken. The archivists certified the work at each stage. The work is valid regardless of whether any living person has read all of it. That is how legal records work. That is how any record works. Ultimately, it exists as evidence whether or not someone is present to read it. He nodded slowly, in the way of someone fitting a new understanding into a framework. I did not push it further. He would think about it, and in thinking about it, he would understand something about the kind of preparation that had produced the encounter he was watching, and that understanding would be useful to him later. At 0641, the mandate registry channel opened again. The commission officer, her designation translated as Varath Mandate 6, the sixth ranking officer of the Varath Mandate Recovery Authority on this commission. She sounded older than Varath Drevath, and considerably more tired, in the way of someone who has read enough of 400,000 pages of index to understand the shape of what they are facing. We have reviewed the counterfiling index, she said. Only the index? I said. The filing is 68 million pages. We have reviewed the index. The index alone is 400,000 pages. Yes. We wanted to be thorough. A long exhale, the translation layer rendered it as something structural releasing. Your adverse possession argument, Section 4. Yes. You cite 714 Varath legal precedents for the 45,000-year threshold. 714, every one drawn from Varath jurisprudence. We built the case entirely from your own legal tradition, your precedents, your threshold, your statutory framework. It seemed the cleanest approach. Your courts found our threshold and then exceeded it by 4,000 years. Approximately. Our Exhibit 1, the earliest settlement record in the filing, is dated 44,000 years before present. The first construction in the crater walls. A pause. They built on the hull. Within 2,000 years of the crash event, yes. The alloy was unlike anything they had access to at the time. It took several centuries to develop the techniques to work it properly. The metallurgical tradition that grew from that effort eventually produced the fabrication processes that are now standard across Earth's industrial infrastructure. Varath Mandate 6 was quiet for a moment. You are saying that the hull of the Varath Ascending contributed to your current industrial capacity. The record is not conclusive on the causal chain, but the earliest Earth metallurgical scholarship shows clear evidence of the alloy's influence on technical development. It is possible the Varath Ascending gave us a direction we would have found more slowly. It is also possible we would have found it regardless. The historical record does not answer the question cleanly. Another pause. You have 417 billion people. As of last year's census. Yes. On this world. The station network and the lunar facility complex add to that number. But I kept the filing focused on the surface claim. She said nothing for several seconds. Our lead hauler has a degraded drive node. We identified the irregularity at the outer marker crossing. Accord Technical Services can provide repair specifications within 24 hours and direct field assistance within 72. If that option is useful to you, it can be incorporated into the formal exchange. You anticipated this. We anticipated a range of contingencies. 9 commercial-grade vessels on a long-duration transit drive degradation was one of several scenarios the brief addressed. I let a moment pass. A vessel with a damaged drive creates complications for the impoundment proceedings. We prefer a clean legal resolution to a navigational incident. What is the impoundment proposal? I read it from the contingency document. 4 vessels released on messenger status, carrying the commission officers and their depositions and certified copies of all relevant proceedings. The remaining 5 vessels held under accord escort pending formal legal review. Drive repairs for the reclaimer, facilitated by Accord Technical Services at no cost. Commission formally dissolved upon acknowledgement of the Theron Compact Section 12, Provision 3, Notice. The depositions would accompany the messenger vessels back to Varath Commission Authority for the formal record. Legal proceedings would continue in absentia. This is not a punitive proceeding, I said. Your people will not be harmed. The escort is a legal formality, the required protocol for a foreign commercial operation in Accord-controlled space with a void commission. I cannot vary it, and I would not if I could. The protocol exists for good reasons that apply equally to everyone, and I believe in what it is designed to do. I know, she said. I am not asking you to vary it. A longer pause. How long did you say you have been preparing for this specific encounter? 31,000 years, give or take. A sound the translation layer rendered as something between an acknowledgement and the final release of an argument that had been held too long. And, in those 31,000 years, she said, you built a legal filing from our own law. We thought it was the right approach. A legal framework that makes its case in the other party's language is more durable than one that relies on superior force alone. The force is there, you can see the formation. But the argument is what matters. The argument should be able to stand on its own. She was quiet for a moment. That is, she said carefully, a very particular way of thinking about this. It is the way we think about it, I said. We have had a long time to develop the approach. She requested 4 more hours. I gave her 6. I used some of that time to walk the length of the bridge and back, which is something I do when I am thinking. Accord's unbroken line has a long bridge, by the standards of most warships in the formation, 400 meters from the forward viewport to the aft command bay. And I have learned over 7 years on this posting that the walk helps me process things that do not resolve neatly in a chair. Sale watched me make the first pass without comment. On the second pass, she said, they're going to accept it, meaning the impoundment proposal. I said I thought so too. She said, they don't have a choice. And I said, they have the choice of making this more difficult than it needs to be. The fact that they are not making it more difficult is worth something. She considered that for a moment, and then returned to her console. I made one more pass and sat back down. What I was thinking about, on those passes, was not the legal proceedings. The legal proceedings were in order. What I was thinking about was the question Velthreth Mandate 6 had asked, how long have you been preparing for this specific encounter? And the answer I had given, which was true, but not complete. 31,000 years covered the formal preparation, the decoding of the commission frequency, the establishment of the Accord Salvage Counter Authority, the building of the filing over 3 decades of millennia by generations of legal scholars who would never know whether their work would be used. That was the institutional answer. The true answer was older. The first human settlement in the crater walls was 44,000 years old. The people who built it did not know what had made the crater. They knew it was deep and sheltered, and that the walls were composed of a strange, strong material that held against the weather better than anything they could quarry elsewhere. They built with it because it was there, and it was useful, and they taught their children to build with it, and the children taught their children. 412 generations of teaching. 412 generations of people who lived in the walls of something they did not have a name for and could not explain, and who found it useful, and who built from it anyway. At some point several thousand years before the translation of the wreck site archives, well, before we had a name for the Varath, or a concept of what the crater represented, the people who lived in those walls began to understand that the material they were building with was not natural. The geometry of the hull sections, the isotopic signatures that stood out against the surrounding geology, the way the alloy degraded differently from any known mineral deposit. The scholars wrote papers about it. The geologists built models. For thousands of years, the crater was one of the great scientific mysteries of the early civilization, classified as a probable impact event but with anomalous characteristics that no purely geological explanation could fully account for. The truth, when it finally came in pieces. The translation of the first recoverable section of the administrative archive. The identification of Varath drive signature isotopes in the impact glass. The cross-reference against the Galactic communication network, which by then we had access to. It took 3 centuries from the first recoverable text to the full understanding of what had happened, and when the understanding arrived, it arrived not as a shock, but as a confirmation of something that the people in the crater walls had been living with for a very long time, without knowing what to call it. We had been building on their mistake for 40,000 years before we knew it was their mistake. That was, I thought, the most Caliph thing about all of it. You build with what you have. You keep building. You find out what it is later, and you keep building anyway, because the building is the thing that matters, and you do not stop the thing that matters, because you have learned its history. The 6 hours passed with the rhythm of a long watch that is going well. The small, continuous tasks of the bridge, the position checks, the formation updates, the standard communications traffic with the Accord Orbital Defense Command. The Caliph Shelf moved through late morning into early afternoon below us, and the city went about its business, and 47 Accord warships held their positions, and 9 Varath vessels sat in formation overhead, and the world did not notice because the world had prepared for exactly this and had built itself accordingly. I went off watch at 1,100 and slept for 90 minutes. I came back at 1,245 and stood at the viewport and looked at the shelf. The light on the city was different in the early afternoon, sharper, lower shadows, the towers more defined. The founding quarter was visible as always at the center of the grid, lower and denser, the old bones of the city. 412 generations of people had built in that bowl. Every one of them had lived on top of the wreck of the Varath ascending, without knowing the name of what they were building on, for most of those generations. The name had come later, with the translation of the administrative archives. The building had come first. That, I thought, was the most important thing about all of it. The building had come first. The knowledge of what they were building on had come later, and had not changed what they had built. It had only added a name to something that already existed, and was already real. At 1,317, the Mandate Registry channel opened. "We accept the proposal," Varath Mandate 6 said. "Acknowledged. Beginning the formal exchange now." The processing took 4 hours, and required precision throughout. Terath transmitted the dissolution notice in Varath legal standard. The Mandate Registry acknowledged receipt and transmitted the commission officer's depositions, signed and certified under Varath procedural law, covering their account of the encounter and their formal acknowledgement of the counterfiling's legal basis. The acknowledgement of the Theron Compact Section 12 proceedings was transmitted and countersigned. The 4 messenger vessels, the Mandate Registry, 2 of the mid-class escorts, 1 tender, carrying the commission officers and their depositions, and certified copies of the dissolution proceedings, and the full counterfiling, and the geological survey, and the surface view feed, were formally released at 1,723, and began their departure vector. I had wanted them to have all of it. Not the geological survey alone, not the legal documents alone, but the live feed, the image of the Caliph Shelf, from 14 kilometers up. The city spread from the coast to the horizon, the founding quarter, visible at its center. I wanted the Varath Commission Authority, at the other end of months of transit, to see that image before they read the legal arguments, because the image was the legal argument made visible. A city built in a crater, 417 billion people, 44,000 years of continuous habitation, not a claim denied by force. A world that had been here, building, long after the Commission thought it had been left behind. The remaining 5 vessels moved into escort position alongside 3 Accord warships. Varath acknowledged the formation without argument. His voice, when he confirmed the escort, was quieter than it had been in the morning, not broken, not defeated, but carrying something that had been processed and accepted, which is its own kind of weight. He said, after a moment of silence on the open channel, "The district built into the crater walls." "Yes," I said. "How old is it?" "The earliest construction, in the inner wall?" "Approximately 44,000 years old. The first settlers were in the crater within 2,000 years of the crash event." A pause. "They built with the hull." "They did. The alloy was unlike anything they had access to at the time. It took them several centuries to develop the processes to work it properly. The techniques they built became the foundation of a metallurgical tradition that shaped everything that came after." "The hull of the Varath ascending," he said. Not a question. He was saying it in his own voice, making it real by hearing himself say it. The commission file was 46,000 years old. The last commission officer, who had actually looked at the crash coordinates, was 46,000 years dead. Between that person and Varath had been 18 generations of bureaucratic renewal, each one seeing the dormancy classification and the commission number and the registered asset designation and approving another cycle without dispatching a review vessel, because a dormant world did not require review, and the commission was properly maintained, and there was no reason to think anything had changed. "Yes," I said. A longer pause. "I did not fill it. We did not think you would survive." He said it slowly, with the care of someone surfacing something from a very deep place. "That is in the commission file, the original departure assessment. The probability models placed civilizational persistence at 4% across the next geological cycle. The file classified this world as dormant on the basis of that assessment. A dormant classification suspended the active review requirement. We have been renewing the commission administratively for 46,000 years without sending a review vessel, because the model said there was nothing here that required review. We know the assessment," I said. "We found it in the Rec Site Administrative Archives. 4% was the figure. Your ancestors' models were not unreasonable given the data they had at the time. I want to be clear about that." A pause. 4%, he said. 4%. And yet, I said. Those 2 words have stayed with me since that day on the bridge. They are not triumph. The people who made the 4% assessment were 46,000 years dead, and there is no triumph to be had over people who are not present to know about it. They are not contempt. The assessment was honest, and honest mistakes made in good faith are not contemptible. The 2 words are something more precise than either of those. They are the acknowledgement of a fact that does not fit inside any argument, any framework, any model. The fact is simply that we were here. We had been here. We had done everything ordinary and necessary that a civilization does across 46,000 years. Building, learning, failing, and recovering, and building again, keeping records, keeping the accounting, and the sum of it was a reality that the models had not generated, and could not have generated, because the models had not been designed to account for what 4%, given enough time and enough work, could actually produce. Varath said, after a long silence, "I will make sure the account is complete when we report to the Commission Authority." "I would appreciate that," I said. "Not for your sake," he said, and his voice carried something I had not heard in it before. Something that was not quite bitterness, and not quite respect, and might have been both at once. The feeling of looking at something that has made your entire professional purpose obsolete, and finding that you cannot blame it for existing, for theirs. They will need to understand what they are looking at. All 18 renewals of this commission, and no one sent a review vessel. That decision belongs to the authority, not to this wing. They need to hold it. "Yes," I said. "They do." A pause. "The people who built the first settlement in the crater walls," he said. "They did not know what had made the crater. Not for a long time. The understanding came gradually, over thousands of years. They built in the walls for most of that time without knowing what they were building on. But they built, he said. They built, I said. The channel was quiet for a moment. Then Varath said, "Your world was assessed at 4%. My commission authority filed a dormancy classification and renewed it 18 times without review. We were wrong about what dormancy meant. Yes. We assumed dormancy was a permanent condition. Yes." A final pause. "It isn't," he said. "Not a question. Not an apology. A fact being recorded." "No," I said. "It isn't." He closed the channel. Drive repairs on the reclaimer began the next morning. Accord Technical Services transmitted the specifications at 0800, and the Varath engineering team had questions, which our engineers answered professionally and in detail. The work took 4 days. Both engineering teams were competent and careful, and communicated with precision. Varath ran a professional crew throughout the entire encounter. From the outer marker crossing to the escort formation, his people had behaved with discipline and care, even after learning that the fundamental premise of their mission was void. That matters. When you discover you are wrong about the thing your mission is built on, you still have to function as a crew. They functioned. On the 5th morning, I stood at the viewport before the watch change and looked at the Calith shelf in the early light. The crater district was fully illuminated, the founding quarter visible as the low bowl at the city's heart, the memorial park at its center, a dark rectangle in the grid of the oldest streets. The memorial had been there for 32,000 years. It was not a memorial to the crash. We do not build memorials to other people's accidents. It was to the 412 generations of workers who had built in the crater walls going back to the first settlers, who had come down into the impact site 44,000 years ago, with nothing but practical necessity, and an unfamiliar alloy, and a great deal of work ahead of them. The inscription at the memorial's center was in the original settlement-era script, carved before the standardization of written language, and it translated, approximately, as, "We found this, and made something of it." Those words were older than the Accord. They were older than our interstellar communications technology. They were older than the counterfiling and the 31,000-year preparation. They were the first thing, the thing under everything else, the reason all of it had been built. We found this, and made something of it. We found a crater, and a strange alloy and 4% odds. And we made something of all of it, and we kept making, generation after generation, until what we had made was large enough to answer every question the Commission had brought across 46,000 years of transit. The 4 messenger vessels were 6 days out by then, carrying their copy of everything toward Varath space. The 5 impounded vessels were in stable escort formation, quiet and compliant, their crews conducting themselves with the same professionalism Varath had maintained throughout. The Commission was formally dissolved. The legal proceedings were underway. Everything was where the brief had said it should be. Sail came to relieve me at the watch change. She stood at the viewport for a moment, before taking her position at the command console, looking at the Calith shelf, the way you look at something you have been looking at for a long time, and that still gives you something, every time. "Quiet night," she said. "Quiet enough," I said. I went to my cabin. I filled out the watch log with the formal entries commission, formally dissolved at 1,317. 4 vessels released on messenger status, 5 vessels under escort, no casualties, no shots fired. Theron Compact Section 12, Provision 3 in effect. Legal proceedings ongoing. Drive repairs complete. All vessels stable. Then I wrote 1 line below the formal record, in the margin where the log format left space for personal observation, because I believed it was true, and because the log was mine, and I could write what I believed. The Varath came for what they left behind. What they found was everything we had made of it. 46,000 years. We kept the accounting. I set the stylus down. I looked at what I had written for a moment. Then I filed the log, turned off the cabin light, and slept.